In the highlands of modern-day Afghanistan, surrounded by rocky mountains and windswept plains, there once stood a city that would shape the history of South and Central Asia for centuries to come. That city was Ghazni, a modest town that would become the capital of a mighty empire. And from its walls rose a dynasty, the Ghaznavids, whose power would stretch from the steppes of Central Asia to the fertile plains of the Punjab. Their story is one of ambition, military brilliance, and cultural fusion. A story that begins not in palaces, but in the barracks of Turkish slave soldiers. To understand the rise of the Ghaznavids, we must go back to the late 9th and early 10th centuries, when the once mighty Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad was beginning to fragment. Across its vast empire, governors and military leaders began carving out territories of their own. Among these was a Persianized dynasty known as the Samanids, who ruled over parts of Iran, Transoxiana, and Afghanistan. It was under their service that a slave named Alptigin rose through the ranks, a man whose ambition would lay the foundation for an empire. Alptigin was originally a Turkish slave soldier, a ghulam, trained in the elite armies of the Islamic world. Like many Mamluks of his time, he was bought young, trained for war, and eventually freed because of his talent and loyalty. Under the Samanid ruler Amir Nasser Tsaw, Alptigin became one of the most trusted generals. But as politics in the Samanid court turned sour, Alptigin fell out of favor. Refusing to accept defeat, he marched eastward in 963 CE with his followers and seized the small town of Ghazni. It was from this unlikely base that the Ghaznavid story began. Alptigin's rule was brief, but his example inspired his successors. After his death, his son-in-law Sabuktigin took command. Sabuktigin too had been a slave, bought, trained, and freed, yet his courage, discipline, and intelligence transformed him into a ruler of destiny. He strengthened Ghazni's fortifications, built alliances with neighboring rulers, and began expanding his territory. At this time, the Hindu Shahi kingdom controlled much of present-day eastern Afghanistan and northwestern India. Their capital was near Kabul, and their king, Jayapala, was a proud and ambitious man. The border between the two powers, the Shahi and the Ghaznavids, became a zone of constant tension. Sabuktigin, seeing opportunity, launched a series of campaigns against Jayapala. These were not yet full invasions, but tests of strength. And in these tests, Sabuktigin proved himself a master of strategy. His small army of Turks and Afghans, hardened by mountain warfare, defeated larger forces through speed and discipline. When Jayapala attempted to invade Ghazni, Sabuktigin counterattacked and pushed deep into Shahi territory. The outcome established Ghazni as a rising power on the map of history. Sabuktigin's victories also opened the doors toward the Indian subcontinent, a region that had fascinated traders, travelers, and conquerors for centuries. When Sabuktigin died in 997 CE, he was succeeded by his son, a young man whose name would one day thunder across the plains of India, Mahmud. Mahmud of Ghazni would take what his father had built and turn it into an empire. But before we explore Mahmud's ambitions, we must understand the world he inherited. Ghazni, at the turn of the millennium, was more than a military outpost. It had become a thriving city, a meeting point for traders from Iran, Central Asia, and India. The local population was a mix of Persians, Turks, and Afghans, speaking different tongues but united under Islam. The court of Ghazni reflected this blend: Persian administrators, Turkish generals, Arab scholars, and local artisans. Mahmud was not content with being a regional ruler. He dreamed of building an empire that would rival Baghdad or Bukhara. His ambition was both political and religious. As a devout Sunni Muslim, he saw himself as the sword of Islam against the frontiers of the non-Muslim world. But as a ruler, he also desired wealth, fame, and legitimacy. The Indian frontier offered both rich temples filled with gold and a reputation that would echo across the Islamic world. Over the course of his reign from 997 to 1030 CE, Mahmud launched 17 major expeditions into the Indian subcontinent. These campaigns took him across Punjab, Sindh, and as far as Gujarat. Each raid had its own purpose, some for plunder, others for political control. But gradually, Mahmud's armies moved beyond raiding to ruling. His most famous invasion was against the temple city of Somnath in Gujarat. The story of that campaign has been told and retold, sometimes as history, sometimes as legend. It is said that when his advisors warned him of the long journey and fierce resistance, Mahmud replied that the glory of destroying idolatry was worth any hardship. When his army finally reached Somnath in 1026, after weeks of fighting, they captured the temple and seized immense wealth. For Mahmud, it was both a religious triumph and a political statement. He returned to Ghazni with treasures that dazzled his court, gold, jewels, and elephants, symbols of the might of his empire. Yet Mahmud was more than just a conqueror. He was also a patron of art, literature, and science. Under his rule, Ghazni became one of the great centers of Persian culture. Poets, scholars, and philosophers gathered in his court. Among them was the great historian and scholar Al-Biruni, who later wrote detailed works about India, its science, religion, and society. Another was the legendary Persian poet Ferdowsi, author of the Shahnameh, the epic of Persian kings. This blend of conquest and culture defined the Ghaznavid era. Mahmud used the wealth from his Indian campaigns not just to build mosques and palaces, but to sponsor knowledge and learning. Ghazni became a shining capital filled with gardens, libraries, and marble halls. However, the vast empire he built rested on fragile foundations. Mahmud ruled with an iron hand, but his successors lacked his vision. After his death in 1030, the throne passed to his son, Masud I. Masud was brave but reckless. He inherited not just a rich empire, but also its challenges, restless generals, ambitious governors, and enemies on multiple fronts. To the west, the rising Seljuk Turks were becoming a serious threat. They were a confederation of nomadic tribes, strong in cavalry and faith. In 1040, at the Battle of Dandankan, the Seljuks defeated the Ghaznavid army, forcing them to retreat from Khorasan. This defeat marked the beginning of the end for Ghaznavid power in Central Asia. Masud shifted the center of his empire eastward toward the Punjab. From that point onward, the Ghaznavids became more closely tied to the Indian subcontinent than to their original homeland. Cities like Lahore and Multan gained importance as new administrative centers. Lahore especially became the jewel of the eastern Ghaznavid domains. It was during the reign of later rulers like Ibrahim and Bahram Shah that Lahore emerged as a vibrant city of culture and trade. Persian became the language of administration, blending with local Indian traditions. Muslim scholars and Sufi mystics began to travel deeper into India, spreading new ideas and ways of life. In this sense, the Ghaznavid presence helped open a door between two worlds, the Islamic culture of Central Asia and the ancient civilization of India. Even as their empire weakened politically, the Ghaznavids' cultural influence continued to grow. The fusion of Persian art, Turkish military discipline, and Indian diversity created a unique heritage. Their architecture, for instance, combined Central Asian geometric design with local stonework traditions. The remains of Ghazni's grand minarets, tall, intricately carved towers, still stand today as silent witnesses of that era's beauty. But history, as always, is a story of rise and fall. By the 12th century, the Ghaznavids were surrounded by powerful rivals. To their west, the Seljuks dominated Persia. To their east, new powers were emerging in India, the Ghurids, based in the rugged mountains of central Afghanistan. The Ghurids were once Ghaznavid vassals, but now they turned against their former masters. In 1151 CE, the Ghurid ruler Alauddin Hussein attacked Ghazni. The city that had once symbolized power and wealth was burned to the ground. The magnificent palaces, libraries, and gardens of Mahmud's age were reduced to ashes. The Ghaznavid rulers fled eastward once again, this time permanently, to Lahore. For nearly half a century more, they clung to power there, ruling over Punjab as a regional dynasty. But their glory was gone. In 1186, the last Ghaznavid ruler, Khusrau Malik, was defeated and captured by the Ghurid conqueror Muhammad of Ghor. With his fall, the Ghaznavid dynasty came to an end. Yet their legacy did not vanish. In many ways, the Ghaznavids laid the groundwork for what would follow: the Ghurids, the Delhi Sultanate, and eventually the great Mughal Empire. They were among the first Muslim dynasties to establish a lasting political and cultural presence in northern India. Through them, Persian became the language of administration and culture in the subcontinent, a tradition that would endure for centuries. The Ghaznavids also left behind something less tangible: the idea that power could come from merit rather than birth. Both Alptigin and Sabuktigin had risen from slavery to sovereignty, a pattern that would repeat in later Indian history with rulers like Qutbuddin Aibak and Iltutmish. Their rise demonstrated the fluidity of medieval Islamic society, where loyalty and ability could sometimes outweigh lineage. If we think about it, the Ghaznavids represent a fascinating paradox. They began as outsiders, Turkic soldiers in a Persian-speaking world. They ruled over diverse peoples: Persians, Afghans, and Indians. They fought for faith and empire, yet patronized scholars who questioned the world through reason and science. Their story is a reminder that history is rarely simple. Empires are not built by one culture alone. They are mosaics of many influences. Even today, the name Ghazni carries echoes of that glorious past. The ruins of Mahmud's palaces, the cracked minarets that once touched the sky, and the old roads leading to Lahore all speak of a time when this land stood at the crossroads of civilizations. And beyond the politics and battles, there is a deeper legacy: the cultural exchange that shaped both sides of the Hindu Kush. The Ghaznavid expansion brought scholars from Iran and Central Asia into India, where they encountered new ideas, languages, and traditions. The blending that began in those centuries would eventually define much of Indo-Islamic civilization in art, music, architecture, and even everyday life. Perhaps that is the greatest legacy of the Ghaznavids, not their conquests, which faded, but the bridges they built between worlds. When we walk through Lahore's old streets or see the Persian influences in Indian architecture and poetry, we are still, in a way, walking through the echoes of Ghazni's age. The empire may have fallen, but its spirit, the meeting of cultures, endures. And so the rise of the Ghaznavids from Ghazni to Punjab is not just a tale of war and ambition. It is a chapter in the longer story of how Central Asia and India became intertwined, how power, faith, and culture flowed back and forth across mountains and rivers, shaping a shared destiny that would last for centuries. Now, as we look back over 1,000 years later, we can still ask ourselves, what truly defines greatness in history? Is it conquest and wealth, or the ideas that survive after empires crumble? What do we remember more, the burning of cities or the birth of new cultures that rise from their ashes? The Ghaznavids remind us that the past is never just about power. It is about transformation, about how contact between peoples changes them both. And perhaps that is why their story still matters, because it shows that even in an age of war, something enduring can emerge, something that connects rather than divides.